Tuesday morning to each one of you on this Ask the Theologian. So glad you are here. Hope you're ready for a great day of biblical, theological, and worldview questions. Let's try to be biblical. Let's try to be entertaining. Let's try to be a little sarcastic. Let's have some great first-time questions. Let's question the assumptions. Let's be persnickety. Boy, aren't we going to have a good time today. So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, from Taos, New Mexico to across America and around the world. Good to see all of you here today. And is always a blessing to see our friends as we gather together. Sometimes, as we say, around the great big electronic table. I see some good questions coming in. Ives, Wesley, and a follow-up from Monday. Let's see, a resurrection question. And a question. I believe we were going to start with Manny today. And be ready for that. Hey, you know, I just happened to look over. You know, we got the bird cam going. Notice that the snow is about gone, ladies and gentlemen. And now that we put the bird cam up, all the birds have decided to go. I've seen some nice woodpeckers today, and a few other beautiful little birds. We'll get back into it. But here is what we came for, your questions. Starting with Manny, the padre of Old San Antone, who has a question about Romans 11:13. And let's just go ahead and read the passage first, where Paul says, "For I speak to you Gentiles, inasmuch as I am the apostle of the Gentiles, I magnify mine office." So the question, Paul was a chosen vessel for the Gentiles, kings, and children of Israel, but only an apostle to the Gentiles, according to Romans 11:13. Let's take that out. So in Acts chapter 9, God says, I believe it's chapter 9, God says, "I want you, Paul, to be my chosen vessel." My chosen vessel to the Gentiles, to the kings, to the children of Israel, all of those given. But then in Romans 11:13, he says, "I am the apostle of the Gentiles." Now, we're not going to go into the Greek on this, but let's make an assumption right here with this and question this assumption, because we may find out it's wrong. But he says, "I am the apostle." You know what would be interesting is to take Paul's words. This would take a little bit of research, though not long. We could do it in 10 minutes. To see, when does Paul talk about an apostle or even being an apostle, and when does he talk about the apostle? The apostle. Let's do just the quickest end of that and see if we can find, and we're just going to go in the King James, and we're going to find the exact phrase, the exact English phrase, the apostle. Okay, it only comes up in Romans 11:13 and Hebrews chapter 3, verse 1, which we'll bring up, but that's unrelated. But let's see how it's used there. Did I say 3:11? I did not say 3:11. Maybe I said 13:11. And it's not there either, but I can go back and look. Yeah, Hebrews 3:1, ladies and gentlemen. So, back here, Hebrews 3:1. Wherefore, holy brethren, partakers of the heavenly calling, consider the apostle and high priest of our profession. Okay, so that obviously is a completely different use there. That is speaking of Jesus Christ. So the only time that anyone refers to the apostle is Paul right here, when he is referring to, the only time in speaking of human, when he's referring to himself being the apostle of the Gentiles. Now, I think even, let's go back over here again. Let's put up two screens. Let's go to Romans chapter 1. And Paul says, an apostle, separated unto the gospel of God, which was promised beforehand. Now, you know it's my position, this gospel of God promised beforehand has to be the kingdom gospel, because the grace gospel was secret. It was not promised afore by his prophets in the Holy Scriptures. So here in Romans 1, an apostle, I would put him, he is an apostle. He is certainly an apostle, but he's lumped in together with the rest of them here. The apostles who take care of the gospel of God, which would be Peter and the others. I am an apostle. But over here he says, I am the apostle of the Gentiles. Now, would it be accurate, as Manny has done, to call him a chosen vessel when it relates to children of Israel, when it relates to kingdom message that he might be delivering from time to time, when he goes into the synagogue, there he's a chosen vessel, especially as it relates to Jews scattered. He's a chosen vessel out there. Hey, when you're out there, take them the message that they need to hear, that Israel needs to hear. And then he is the apostle with the Gentiles. It's a fine nuance, and you could go with it. The only thing I think we would have to say is, let's see. Let's put it in this regard. I am the pastor of America's greatest tiny church, the Taos First Baptist Church. I am the pastor at Taos First Baptist. But I gather together from time to time, as little as possible, from time to time with pastors. So I am not the only pastor, but I am the pastor for Taos First Baptist Church, and there is no other. So I would put it in that mix. There are other apostles, we know that, but there is only one apostle to the Gentiles, we know that. So in that regard, yeah, I think you're, and even Paul's apostleship, we would want to go back into Acts 9 and the three times that he mentions the experience on the road to Damascus and see if apostle is ever used there. I'm not sure that it is. I think it's phrases like chosen vessel. So probably in the finest point of speaking, to speak of Paul's ministry as a chosen vessel, and maybe even it would be better to say, to speak of Saul's ministry as a chosen vessel and Paul's ministry as the apostle. I think you got something there, Manny. I think we need to work through it and make sure it's a very fine point, and we don't want to get, what would we say, too fine on it. We don't want to split hairs. We don't want to be so refined that what we begin saying has exceptions and is not true. I'll give a grammar example. I before E except after C. So this is a wonderful rule, but it's not really a rule because it's got so many exceptions. So here's a good starting point. Here's a good principle. If you're not sure after it, go I after E, except after C, and words like Piedmont. I just happened to look at Jim in Piedmont, which breaks the I after E rule. I after E, except after C, and sometimes a bunch of other letters, and sometimes even in Piedmont. I wonder in Piedmont, at the Piedmont Elementary School, do they teach the I after E except after C rule? Probably not. So, good point, Manny. I just think be careful applying it. There might be too many exceptions. But I do think it helps to sort of give a good, I don't know, a good starting point of understanding to carry that out. Excellent. Lourdes down in San Juan, Puerto Rico, has a question about Acts chapter 17, verse 26. Paul speaking, and hath made of one blood all nations of men for to dwell on the face of the earth, and hath determined the times before appointed and the bounds of their habitation. Couple of things you can do with this that are wrong. The biggest thing, I said a couple of things, but here the biggest thing you can do is to make this a determination, or make this a passage which says God has numbered the exact days of Lourdes's life, of Randy's life. It's going to start here, end here. God has set that. There is absolutely nothing that can be done about it. It is a Calvinist position or a Reformed theology position. Now, God hath made of one blood all nations of men for to dwell on the face of the earth. I would take this little passage right here and say we all come from Adam. One blood, Adam. Every man on earth came from Adam. So I would take that in a fairly simple way there. That, by the way, would become problematic for those, and this you find this mostly in forms of liberal Christianity, but there are some forms of, and this is weird, you find this a number of times, very far-right fundamentalist theology that ends up holding the same as liberal theology on that certain point. It's almost like rather than a continuum that goes apart, it's kind of a loop, and you end up looping around. This is why libertarians on the far right are often holding the same positions as liberals on the far left. Kind of loops around. Well, on this particular issue, there are some far right and some far left that have sort of met on the backside, who believe that there was more than just Adam, that Adam was representative in the story, but there were more there. I think you would have to interpret this differently than I'm interpreting it to be able to sustain that idea. We won't try to sustain or deny that idea, but nonetheless, I think it's pretty clear here, made of one blood, I take this Adam's blood, all nations of men for to dwell on the earth. Now then, if you hold that there is more than one blood, you gotta deal with that passage. Not many of us hold to that, so we won't go into it. But then you get to the next part. So God here hath determined the times before appointed and the bounds of their habitation. Now, let's start at the back end. The bounds of their habitation. I think we could take this bounds of their habitation and look at it a number of ways. You could look at it to say there are physical boundaries in which the Chinese may dwell, in which the Puerto Ricans may dwell, in which the Americans may dwell, North Americans, United Statesians, on and on. You go through that. I would put bounds not in terms of national boundaries. I'm kind of a fan of national boundaries, but I would not put bounds in Acts chapter 17, verse 26 in terms of national boundaries. Rather, God hath determined the times, and let's call this the bounds of their habitation here. Let's call that the abilities, the extent of their reach. This is how far they can go and no further. And, by the way, we see that those bounds seem to be set pretty far out there. You know, if we live long enough, there probably will be some permanent establishment of humanity on the moon or on Mars. And, you know, won't be great living, but there'll be scientific establishments there. And if you got scientists, you're going to have a Starbucks. And so, you know, there'll be commerce there. And then that'll all kind of grow, you know, because if you got Starbucks, then you got to have, you know, a printing company. And you got to, you know, on and on. It just sort of snowballs. But science being the basis of it would, yeah, you know, so what I'm saying is, I think that God has set some limitations to what we can be and what we can do, but we haven't figured out what those limitations are yet. Maybe we're getting close with transhumanism. At what point are you not human anymore? I suspect, it's a suspicion, but I suspect that's the bounds of our habitation, but I would interpret it that way. So then, again, determine the times before appointed. Right here is, you know, there's two ways where you can put it. One is you can just take the times of mankind. God has determined that this thing is not going to go on forever, which would imply that the new heaven and the new earth was always a plan. It was always in the plan. That the times of earth as we know it, the heavens and the earth as we know it, is going to go away. And that time has been appointed before. I wouldn't have a problem with that. I don't have a problem with taking this in even in a slightly more specific sense to say that God determined, let's say, that the Babylonians, their kingdom was going to come to an end. The Assyrians, even you know, Jonah goes to Nineveh and says, you got 40 days. That's how long you've got. God has determined this. Now, the people, as you remember, repented, and they had a lot more than 40 days. They had hundreds of years beyond that. So in that case, you'd say, hey, God gave a little determination, but either changed his mind or it was a contingency, is probably the better way to put it. It was a contingency that was put on there. So I really think I would take this in a fairly general, not specific way. I certainly would not say God has determined that, you know, Randy will live to be 120, but, you know, Tom, Dick, and Harry, they're only going to make it to 72.6. Really depends on so many different factors. Genetic factors, environmental factors, the random, accidents, lifestyle factors, choice factors, so much involved in there. So my take on it is general. Thank you. Let's see, yesterday we had a conversation. It came from Jay, and the question from Jay had to do with, did God make me specifically? Or did God make the biological process that made me? Gerard had a little remark I didn't get to yesterday. Adam and Eve, male and female, created he them. And then you've got Seth, which does say in chapter 5, Seth was created in the image of Adam. and Noah and his sons and their wives. Now, Gerard uses the word carbon copies. Carbon copies. We're all carbon copies until today. And whereas we might argue that much on the term carbon copy, I think we get your point, and I think we agree there that I don't know. I'm sure this would be easy to look up, but I don't know what the variance is in DNA. The variance of humanity. You know, I mean, we look here. We've got Scott and Jim and Bev and Debbie and Wesley and Daryl and Felicia and Nancy and Rich and Alex and Timothy and Toby and Helen. You know, and Ives and Robert and Kitty and another Randy and you know, I mean, goes on and on. And not one of us are the same. I mean, we got a completely different fingerprint. And yet, we're all mostly the same. I mean, we all have a different fingerprint, but we all have fingers and we all have a fingerprint. And so that's such a commonality. So there's this little, been using the word nuance lately, there's this little nuance in our fingerprint. That's not a true carbon copy, but wow, sure is close. And, you know, I mean, we all have a head, we all have, you know, a nose, a mouth, all that kind of stuff goes together there. So, thank you. Oh, here's another follow-up question from Jay's, and then we're going to get to Wesley. The follow-up question from Jay's question, which was an interesting discussion yesterday. Will God be making our eternal glorified body? So let's say, we're just going to sound almost rationalistic here, but that's okay. We're big boys and girls. We can handle it. So we put aside the mysticism of God put the formula together that made me just like me. And we've said, I think biological forces and then some environmental forces and some experiences, that's what made me to be me. Now, what about when me becomes my glorified body? Will God be making that like he did with Adam? Because he gave Adam all those characteristics that, let's say, natural forces gave me. Supernatural forces gave them to Adam. So, excellent thought. I think the answer is, now we see through a glass darkly. Someday we'll know. But as we think about our glorified bodies, you know, has God in the natural forces put that seed within us, so to speak? Or does he come down and specifically remold and remake, fashion us as he did for Eve, for example, because Eve came out of human flesh, so we would probably be more likened in that regard, that he takes this rib and he fashions it. I think, you know, I'm thinking at it quickly here. This is probably where I would go, is that our glorified bodies are going to be created by God in the way that Eve was created from Adam. Seems to be the best assumption to take. Follow that assumption through and see how we come to it and see what's up there. Let's go to Wesley, who's told me where he's from before, and how do I forget? It's not Ellensburg, is it? Wesley, I think you might be live. Help me out there. But anyway, Wesley, good to see you. What are your thoughts on the term fundamentalist? Stop right there. Wesley has what no doubt is some good commentary and question that goes on beyond this, but I want to stop right there. I'll give some of my environmental experience. Having grown up in a Southern Baptist world, I was not a fundamentalist. And I didn't really like the term fundamentalist. As a matter of fact, I sort of came of age in what was called the conservative resurgence of the Southern Baptist Convention. This started in 1979. Now, I was ninth grade then. But it lasted 10, 12 years. And it was a turning of the Southern Baptist Convention to be much more conservative than it had been in the 60s and 70s. And it had been liberal. So it turned it more conservative, more biblical. It was a good thing. But even in that thing, they did not want to use the term fundamentalist. When they also didn't want to use the term liberals. As a matter of fact, there was this thing called, I think it was called the Peace Committee. The Peace Committee was designed to bring peace. It didn't. I don't think that's never happened. So the Peace Committee met. It had some famous names on it. I'm pretty sure, if memory serves me correctly, Charles Stanley, Adrian Rogers, well-known names. They were going to bring peace. The Peace Committee, first of all, said, well, we shouldn't call each other names. If we're going to have peace, we shouldn't call each other names. And the conservatives were calling those to the left liberals. They didn't like that. They're not liberals. And those to the left were calling the conservatives fundamentalist. They didn't like that. We are not fundamentalist. In fact, those on the left usually would call them fundamentalist. So, the Southern Baptist ethos was an allergy to liberal fundamentalist. Don't want either. Because Southern Baptists are sort of, and I would say are, sort of this big tent, middle of the road kind of jelly. Try to nail that to a wall. Evangelical. So that's a long way around saying I didn't like the term. Now, let me tell you, the Peace Committee decided in the Southern Baptist Convention, they decided they would call them, what was it? I've forgotten the exact term. Moderate was the term for the liberals. Conservative something. There was a hyphenated. I think both of them were hyphenated. But anyway, let's settle on moderates and conservatives. That was the terminology that everybody began to use then. Don't call people bad names. He's moderate. He's conservative. Kumbaya, my Lord. And the fundamentalists? We don't want them. So I went to a moderate seminary, actually. Russell Dilday was the president of the seminary. He was a leading moderate in all of that. He ended up, a few years after I graduated, he got fired by the conservatives who had eventually taken over the boards. So he got ousted. I think he's still alive today, if I'm not mistaken. And eventually the more conservatives came in. Ultimately, Paige Patterson became the president there. Now, that's a lot of history. If you like history, you like that. If you don't like history, sorry. Over time, years and years and years, I began to study things like the original fundamentalists that came from R.A. Torrey and the people who gathered together and wrote the book, wrote a series of newspaper volumes called The Fundamentals. The Fundamentals were put into book form. Eventually, they were just compiled. And the fundamentals were simple things: the virgin birth of Jesus Christ, the inerrancy of the scriptures, the truth and the veracity of the miracles in the Bible, the personal resurrection and return of Jesus Christ. There was one more. There were 5 fundamentals. Well, I looked at those and said, I hold to every one of those 5 fundamentals. Absolutely. And that's the group of people that began to be called the fundamentalists. So I began to say, well, you know what? I mean, if that's what a fundamentalist is, then I'm a fundamentalist. And I sort of eased into it a little bit, but I was not a fundamentalist like, say, the independent fundamentalists, the Independent Fundamentalist Baptist Church. And would have misunderstood them to some degree. A little woodpecker there, just in case you want to see. I would have misunderstood the IFB. But later I continued to grow, continued to change, continued to study the Word. I went from NASB slowly into King James, began to use the King James. I began to hold fundamentalist positions, and eventually I wrote a little booklet called Why I Am a Fundamentalist and You Should Be Too. Now in there I said, I basically said evangelicalism is so messed up and sick that you don't want to claim being an evangelical. You probably are a fundamentalist, and you need to own it. You need to become one. And I talk in there about some changes that fundamentalists need to take in their thinking. Anyway, my thought on, what are your thoughts on the term fundamentalist? And then I'm going to get into your comments. My thought on the term fundamentalist is I own it. I'm proud of it. I think we ought to take that word and make a good thing of it. It has become bad in church society. It's become bad in political society. Nobody's supposed to be a fundamentalist, right? Why not? It's the best thing you can be. Hold to some fundamentals. Now, Wesley says, although I hold to fundamentals, I've stopped calling myself fundamentalist because the only people I hear using the label were preachers from the IFB that never defined it or talked about the fundamentals themselves. There is a good point here, and I think this is the biggest reason why people are scared of the fundamentalists, is because it's branded by independent fundamentalist preachers who don't talk about the fundamentals. What many, and this I think probably has changed to some degree, but what many of the fundamentalists talk about is, that women should wear dresses, and you should not drink or smoke or chew or go with girls who do. And it was sort of a ranting against societal ills, more so than holding to the fundamentals of the faith. Now, that was the reputation. And I would say probably still is the reputation. But what I want to know is that reality? We may come back to that, but let me keep reading. Wesley says, it seems to me it's more of a cultural label for the IFB about standards, etc. Okay, there we hit the same, as these cultural standards is what made you a fundamentalist. And, if you didn't hold to those cultural standards, or you were just uncomfortable with the way that those cultural standards were presented, kind of the judgmental, almost verging on works-based righteousness, back away from that. Now, Wesley says, I notice that you call yourself a fundamentalist. What exactly does that mean? And is it a mistake for me to set it aside? Okay, I think, and I feel your pain because your name is my name too. It sounds to me like we come from the same issue and the same background. Let me tell you, I began to meet a few real fundamentalists. And when I met those real fundamentalists, I found out, you know what, they're different than I expected. They didn't breathe fire. They were kind of nice people. And I held to some of their theology. Here, I just pulled up the book here, Why I'm a Fundamentalist and You Should Be Too. Here's what I wanted to, let's see. I don't know how to, can I make that bigger there? I want this over here. This book is dedicated to two fundamentalists who blessed my ministry. Pastor Kyle Osfeld of Pampa, Texas, is a friend and encourager who risked his fundamentalist reputation by befriending an evangelical pastor who at the time had no clue what a fundamentalist really was. I used to go to lunch with Pastor Kyle. We would hang out some together, small town. We were both young men. He's a little younger than I am. And I began to realize, hey, he's sort of nice. He's normal. He likes to do the same things I do. Cares about his church, preaches the word. Doesn't have horns. And then second, Pastor Jerry Cook of Santa Clarita, California, introduced me to the world of fundamentalism and allowed me to meet and mingle with real-life fundamentalists. Because he called me while I was still pastor of First Baptist Katy and said, hey, why don't you come out and talk to our pastor's fellowship? I didn't even know what a pastor's fellowship was. It's this fundamentalist kind of thing. And all the pastors, you know, from the fundamentalists kind of network together, and they all... And I realized I'm not really so different from these guys. I think I'm pretty much one of them. So I began to get more comfortable that the straw man that I had in my mind wasn't all that much reality. It was more my, you know, some experience I had as a 3-year-old or something. I don't know. Something I had heard somewhere, some reputation that was out there. But the reality was that now that I often will go into a fundamentalist church, that church looks like my church. That church smells like my church. That church preaches like my church. That church sings like my church. That church... And so I've grown to be much more comfortable saying, there is still, I am sure, I have no doubt at all, you could still find that fire-breathing fundamentalist who's worried about, or his sermon is on, I remember the sermons back in the, what was it, the 80s or the 90s when HBO came out. Is HBO still a thing? I don't even know. But, you know, the fundamentalist would have given a whole sermon on it. At HBO, it's hell's box office. That's what it is. And if you watch that, you're probably going straight to hell. Now is the time for you to repent. Get out of your sin. You got that hell's box office right in your living room in that boob tube, spitting out that sin into your life. See, I could have made a good fundamentalist. That's the picture I had of fundamentalism. But now I'm not sure that there's many of those left. I think there probably are some of those left, but not many of them. And I don't know if they've come leftward and I went rightward and we met over there somewhere, or if they just realized, hey, you know. So a lot of when I read fundamentalist authors, I find out, hey, well, you know, that's the position I hold. So I feel your pain, Wesley, and I'd say, let me send you this little book. Here's the table of contents. A little history. Who are evangelicals? What is a fundamentalist today? I think this is kind of important. It's a rejection of ecumenicalism. It's a rejection of inaugurated eschatology. It's an insistence on the visible church as the only visible expression of the body of Christ. And it's an insistence on verbal plenary inspiration. Those four things is what I define as a fundamentalist today. So, you know, they might sing a praise chorus rather than a hymn, whatever, it doesn't matter. These are what's a fundamentalist today. And what happens when these fundamentalists are rejected? Number one, you might not really be a fundamentalist. Two, you may need to refine some of your beliefs. And three, you may have misunderstood me based on terminology. Now, it's only a 34-page little pocket book. It's fairly simple, but check that out. Now, here's my desire for fundamentalists out there, fundamentalist pastors. Stick to preaching the word. I think most of you do. And by that, I don't mean you can't rant on politics every now and then or some societal thing. I'm all for it. Go for that. But that's icing on the cake. Make sure you're doing really good, solid Bible study. You're teaching people the word. And have good fellowship within your church. Most fundamentalists are pretty good at this. They love each other, brothers and sisters. Have good fellowship within your church. That'll help go a long way, those two things right there. But then my biggest desire for fundamentalists is that you'd become right dividers. You would deal with the issue of when did the church begin? You've already dealt with the issue of what the Bible is, which evangelicalism hasn't. And, on my YouTube channel, I've got, I don't know if you can see all this here, but here's the, maybe let me do this a different way. Let's go to youtube.com/Randy White and hit shorts right there. Okay, one of these, where is it? Christians can't figure out what the Bible is, right there. I think I've done 10 shorts, and this one has the highest views right here. Christians can't figure out what the Bible is. The good news is the fundamentalists figured it out. They know the underlying textual issues. They've studied this more than anybody else. Evangelicals don't even have a clue based upon the comments that are given on that and the number of thumbs down and all that was given. Evangelicals need to figure out what the Bible is. But fundamentalists figured it out. You don't have to have that argument. Here, I just put this one up today. It's only got 6 views so far. When did the church begin? How's that for a collection of expressions? When did the church begin? That's what I want fundamentalists to hone in on, because that'll make a big difference. 60 seconds that'll change your life right there. When did the church begin? Okay, let's move to Ives in San Fernando, Pampanga. Pampanga, San Fernando. Pastor Timothy, I am a fundamentalist. I find that most, is it appropriate to say all? I don't know. A vast majority of right dividers are fundamentalists. A different kind of fundamentalist than the independent fundamentalist Baptist. I think the non-Baptist the non-Baptist right dividing fundamentalist, how's that? Is a very different feel, but nonetheless, it's a solid fundamentalism. They've already figured out what the Bible is, and they figured out what the church is, where the church begins. So, bless you on that. Hey, can I add one more thing? I got to get to Ives here. The Independent Fundamental Churches of America, IFCA, is an organization out there, and it is mostly non-Baptist fundamentalists, largely Acts 2 dispensationalists, Bible churches, community churches, non-Baptist fundamentalist churches. They also have a very different feel from the independent fundamentalists. Independent Fundamental Churches of America, IFCA. But, I looked at IFCA when I was toying around with what do I do? I'm a Southern Baptist. They are so middle of the road, big tent, evangelical. I'm not that. What do I do? Where do I go? I looked at the GARBC, General Association of Regular Baptist Churches. They're more fundamental than the SBC, but ultimately I said, they're too Calvinist and they're wishy-washy on a lot of things. I can't go that way. And I looked at the IFCA. The IFCA takes both church members and individual members. And I looked at that. But you've got to sign this covenant with them that I couldn't sign because of some of the positions that they take in there. And one of them is to be true to their covenant. Been there, done that. I'm not doing that. Because even if I agree later, today, I might actually study the Bible and find out where you guys are wrong in your covenant. I am not signing myself to any man's covenant, creed, confession, whatever it is. You call it anything. I am not signing it. And I think that's sort of a fundamental, especially independent. Independent and fundamental always go together. Independent, fundamental churches of America have to sign away their independence. Come on, IFCA, get with it. Rethink that. Now going to Ives, I think. Yeah, even evangelicals don't know what evangelical means. I got him. Ives, I'm coming to you. So I mentioned Pampanga. It's the state, am I right, in the Philippines? And Jay said, isn't that Corey Matthews' girlfriend? I am so old, Jay. I don't know who Corey Matthews is or his girlfriend. But anyway, Ives has a question, and we are going to take his question now. Can you help me reconcile Matthew 24:39 through 41 with Matthew 25:31 through 33? I think we can at least try. Let's read them and then see what we've got. I've pulled the two scriptures up. Matthew 24:39. And knew not until the flood came, took them all away. So shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. There shall be two in the field, one shall be taken, the other left. Two women shall be grinding at the mill, one shall be taken and the other left. We're going to compare those three verses with 25:31 through 33. Here we go. When the Son of Man shall come in his glory, and all the holy angels with him, then shall he sit upon the throne, and before him shall be gathered all nations. He shall separate them one from another, as a shepherd divideth the sheep from the goats. He shall set the sheep on the right hand and the goats on the left. Now, both of these, we have the coming of the Son of Man, and the Son of Man shall come. So, and I don't think we have any change here with his glory, in his glory. I think that's added in Matthew 25, but I think we're talking about the same coming in Matthew 39. So I would put both of them to be about, let's call it the second coming. But in 40 and 41, or excuse me, in chapter 24, 40 and 41, we have one taken, the other left. Whereas here, we have sheep on the right, goats on the left. Now, I want to go down to, let's say, verse 34. Come, ye blessed, inherit the kingdom. Can I, if we, let's just underline this in green. Can we underline, how do I do this? Inherit the kingdom prepared for you. Underline it. There we go. I don't know if that's green, but it's underlined, so that's good. Inherit the kingdom. I am going to say that is this group of people right here. The ones who were left inherited the kingdom. Now, if you jump down to the end, the others depart from me. Can I? Guess those colors don't work. Depart from me, those are the ones that shall be taken. Now, in other words, Matthew 24, 39 through 41 is saying the same things as Matthew 25, 31 and following, but Matthew 25 gives more detail. Some are cast away. They are taken. They are taken to the judgment. Others are left to enjoy the benefits of the kingdom. So, same thing, more detail on Matthew 25 than there is on Matthew 24. I hope that helps. You know what I think confuses us here, Ives, is when we read Matthew 24, 39 through 41, we so much hear the rapture there that when we hear taken and left, we think of it as in rapture terms, as in taken up into heaven and left behind. And I think we should not think about those terms, those various forms. I think rather taken is, in this regard, taken off into destruction. Left is left behind to inherit the kingdom that has been prepared for them. So I think that's where your thinking probably is confusing you on that. Appreciate you, Ives, down in the Philippines. Thank you. Appreciate that. Let's see here. Let's go to trying to get these in order. Is the time, anonymous question, is the time of the Gentiles connected to the day of the Lord? Yes, it is. The times of the Gentiles probably ends at the second coming. Now, you could argue that a little bit. Maybe you could put it at somewhere late in the 6th, 7th seal, but there you're so close to the second coming. Anyway, I'm not sure it's a distinction without a difference. So yes, it is connected to the day of the Lord. I would say we are in the times of the Gentiles, but the times of the Gentiles will extend, or the time of the Gentiles, however you want to say that, will extend beyond the rapture. It's not the body of Christ. The time of the Gentiles is not the body of Christ, even though the body of Christ is living today within the time of the Gentiles. But yeah, I would connect it with the day of the Lord, that when the day of the Lord comes, the time of the Gentiles has come to full, and it is over. Thank you. Another anonymous question. Is there a resurrection at the end of the millennium? Yes, I would put that as the resurrection that you read about in Revelation chapter 20. It is the resurrection of the rest of the dead. That would be not the Jews, not the dead in Christ. They have all been risen again. But it would be the Gentiles who had rejected salvation however it was offered unto them. In the day of grace, through the gospel of grace. Prior to that, or after that, they didn't become part of Israel. If they'd have become part of Israel, they would have been taken care of with Israel. But they weren't. So the rest of the dead is everybody who hadn't got a resurrection up to this point. And the body of Christ has got a resurrection, and the nation of Israel's got a resurrection. The rest of the dead get theirs at the end at Revelation chapter 20. You can check that out, about the first 10 verses or so. Let's see. In your series on Philippians, I started to say on the Philippines. In your series in Philippians, you put 129 in green and say it's emphatically for the Philippians, if I understand correctly. Then it's not given us to believe also. Not a work, but sure sounds Calvinist to me. Let's check that out. You could possibly be right. But let's, first of all, let me just check and make sure I put that in green. I did. And that passage, if I can get it up here for you. This passage, I have, let's go ahead and change this to green. Okay. Unto you, Philippians, it is given in behalf of Christ, not only to believe on him, but also to suffer for his sake. Okay. Now, the anonymous question here might have some value. So here's what green means for me. When I color-coded in green, a Pauline epistle in green, it means, I think he's really talking to the specific audience there, but it could incidentally be true for us. I wouldn't build a doctrine on it, but, you know, if you want to take that and apply it to yourself, you're probably not going to do yourself any harm. Am I correct there, or does this make it harmful? Does it make it Calvinistic? Does it make it works? As the insightful anonymous question has. Let's go back. Unto you it is given. I think that's the key I want to check out there. It is given. In the behalf of Christ, not only to believe, but also to suffer. I want to look, let me look at the Greek here for just a moment. I want to see how strong that phrase, it is given. Could that be in the sense of God has given every man, woman, boy, or girl the opportunity to believe in him, to reject him? Now, I don't think that's exactly what he's saying, but could I use it in that sense? Or does it is given really mean it is appointed? Kardizomai. It comes, kardizomai is this phrase, it's the word right here, given. It is given. It comes from charis, which is grace. Every now and then there's an English name, charis. That's how a lot of times we say it, but it's the Greek word charis, grace. So if we take it that way, hey, you, since it's an anonymous question, I'll say Tom, Dick, and Harry. You, Tom, Dick, and Harry, you can believe in him, you can suffer with him, for his sake, you can suffer for his sake, You can believe on him. God's given you sort of an open-ended opportunity to take this as far as you want to. It's yours. That's the way I was taking it when I put it in green. To say, yeah. Now, if we could argue, and I think it would be hard to argue, but if we could argue that Paul is actually saying, hey, Philippians, the situation you are in has enabled you to believe, but it also requires or has put you into, whether you wanted it or not, suffering. In that case, I see what you're saying. Yeah, it becomes a Calvinistic based works, because somebody could someone with a Calvinist bent, which is most of non-Catholic world, someone with a Calvinist bent would come and say, hey, I guess it's given unto you to believe and to suffer for him. Boy, are they persecuting my church, my faith. Well, it's given unto you to suffer to him. This is the will of God. You could take it that way. I think it's a little bit of a misuse of Philippians 1:29. So I don't want to take this and go so far as blue and build a doctrine out of it, but to say, hey, if you want to, this is the challenge with color coding these things. Yeah, you got the challenge whether you color code it or not, but when you color code it, it brings the challenge to the surface. And that is to say, what do I do with this verse? How should I apply it? Should I not apply it? Is it completely unapplicable? What do I do with this verse? And it becomes a real challenge there. Thank you for bringing that up. And tomorrow, I like that. Tomorrow we're going to start with Dear William out in Aliso Viejo, California, if memory serves me correctly. Is there a chance that the beast in the book of Revelation is pertaining to AI and the Neuralink kinds of advancements in technology that mixes humanity with machines? That'll be fun to start with tomorrow. Good to see you all. Thank you very much for being here. I see someone's talking about getting this newest book, The Myth of Verbatim Identicality. The author sent me a list and said, send the book to these people, I'll pay. So I sent those up. I don't even know who's on the list. I was getting a little bit of credit there for doing it, and all I did was hand off the list and say, send those out. But this is a good book. Y'all check that out. And appreciate it. Thanks for being here with us today on a good day. You can check out that new short on YouTube about figuring out when the church began. I don't answer the question in the short. I've only got 60 seconds, so I just sort of put it out there. Hey, this is something we should figure out. Don't you think? It's amazing. I don't know how the comments on this will be, but I know how the comments on figure out what the Bible is. It's like an attack on God to say the church needs to figure this out. Read some of the comments on it. An attack on, I think that's the one that said if you didn't hate God so much, he wouldn't have made you bald-headed. It's an attack on God to say, here's a weakness within the church. The church doesn't really want to deal with those weaknesses because of the evangelical industrial comments. Okay, God bless. We'll see y'all soon. Thanks for joining us here today again, and we'll be back tomorrow, 10 a.m. Mountain Time, and then back tomorrow night for the Gospel of Mark. Always a joy to be with you. You can put your questions in at askthetheologian.com. We'll see you soon.